All right. So I'm Jesse Mez. I'm a behavioral neurologist, and I take care of patients with memory and aging problems. I work across the Framingham Heart Study Brain Aging Program, as well as the BU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and the BU CTE Center. And I'm really interested in how head trauma relates to long-term neurodegenerative problems. And Framingham gives us this unique opportunity to be able to look at head trauma across large group of people across their entire lifetime, from the 1940s all the way to the current time. So we looked at Framingham charts. We looked at generation 1 and generation 2, our entire 10,000 charts. And we quantified all of the TBIs from medical records across those charts. And what we saw was, when we looked across generations, that the amount of TBI detected, not surprisingly, increased across generations. And then when we looked across age, we also saw that TBI increased tremendously with age, and that most of those TBIs were related to falls as opposed to car accidents or other types of accidents, which in the TBI literature is most of whom is studied. We then looked at how these TBIs are related to mortality. And there's really good literature that TBI is related to mortality, but the etiology of that mortality is really unclear. And Framingham gave us the opportunity to see that almost the entire relationship between TBI and mortality is through dementia-related mortality. So these are individuals who are hitting their head and then years later are developing dementia and passing away related to that. And then we looked more closely at TBI and MRI from our Framingham Heart Study Brain Aging Program. And we saw significant sex differences, where we really saw a big difference in women in the hippocampus, but we didn't see that nearly as much in men. And then we also looked at TBI and its relationship to dementia. And what we saw was that it was really the TBIs that are late in life that seem to be related to mortality, to dementia. And then that raises the question, well, is this truly a causal relationship, or is there some sort of reverse causality? Is it actually these individuals who are becoming demented and then they're falling, hitting their head? But when we actually removed anybody who had dementia, we still saw this TBI dementia relationship. But what we also know is that neurodegenerative changes begin in the brain 20 years before folks start to show symptoms. So it's clear that these folks have these neurodegenerative changes in their brain, even if they're not yet manifesting symptoms. So it's this unusual interaction between the TBI and maybe these subclinical changes in the brain. We've also looked really carefully leveraging our brain bank, and we've combined our brain bank at Framingham with some of our other brain banks in the BU ADRC and other places. And we've also looked carefully at this entity called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is this other neurodegenerative disease that doesn't seem to be linked so much to a single traumatic brain injury, but rather to repeated hits, thousands of hits, usually in contact sports, or the military over a career. And what we saw with Framingham brains, as well as our other brains, was that there's this really nice dose-response relationship. The more years you play, the higher risk you have for this chronic traumatic encephalopathy neuropathology. And we've seen this across hockey, and we've seen this across American football. And here we actually developed some cut points so that clinicians can know who is most at risk. And currently, CTE can only be diagnosed after death, but these cut points we're leveraging to learn to diagnose the disease in life. We actually have a meeting in the fall using some of this data to learn to diagnose in life. And then lastly, I just want to talk about harmonization. We've harmonized cognitive data, neuropathological data across Framingham, as well as several other brain aging programs. And we've looked at relationships between head injury and these outcomes across all of these studies, and we're similarly doing that for neuropathology. So it gives a lot of opportunities to look at head injury, but also a lot of other relationships with neurodegeneration. That's all, and thank you so much.